Good evening, and welcome to the Lepus Print Authors Reading at the 2021 Allingham Festival. Lepus Print is the new publishing venture in Sligo, spearheaded by Brian Leyden. Brian himself is the author of novels and screenplays and memoir, and he's no stranger to the Allingham Festival. Over the years, he has judged many of our writing competitions, and he's launched the work of a good number of well-known writers. Tonight, he is bringing two of the first Lepus Print authors to showcase their work. So on behalf of the 2021 Allingham Festival Committee, it's a pleasure to hand over the program to Brian Leyden. Right, unmute.
I had to do that. Hello. It's not like me to be muted, you know. I'm not that type. But it's a pleasure, Tom, to be here at the Allingham Festival in 2021. I know we're virtual at the moment on the events. There's certain blessings to that as well in these dark winter evenings, and that the festival is happening at all and these literary events are going ahead is just marvelous, and a credit to everyone involved, and I know to yourself and Monica especially, very strong driving force. And we had discussed, as many a discussion as authors ourselves, Tom and Monica and Mary and Johnny, about the whole situation of publishing and how difficult it's becoming in many ways for many people, and how indeed events like COVID and Brexit and that are only adding to the difficulty. Shortages of paper, shortages of resources, and also the fact that the mainstream publishing is shrinking and becoming more risk averse because you know, English language books were making a considerable presence in, although not much to the liking of French, Dutch, German publishers, but the fact was English publishers were making inroads there. Brexit has tended to scupper that and certainly changed the book prices, and we have to watch that space as to availability of books. So there were many negatives to the fact that what's happening in the world in publishing, but there were also positives in that there seemed to be opportunities in this for us, you know, holes in the shelf on stocking, excuse me, more people kind of interested in their own locality and what was happening. And it did strike me that if you lived in Barcelona or you lived in Spain or other parts of the world, there may be a small independent publishing industry with a distinct identity and not entirely dependent on the center, might in fact draw its character from being peripheral and have that as a strength. All of those things came together and fused into a concept which began as kind of exploring the self-publishing and other publishing platforms that were out there, and finding that while they have many virtues, the more you could pull the product back towards the center of mainstream publishing and all of the rigorous checks and balances and commitment to quality overall in terms of the looks of the book, the design of the books, and the content of the books and the way they're presented, all of those things lent itself that we should assume more control on that. And therefore, we began to see an opportunity for an entity like Lepus Print. And we also decided that we would, if that was to happen, then we had to figure out a vision for this entity. And Lepus Print does aim to become, we're an independent publisher of fiction, poetry, non-fiction. We haven't considered fully yet where we go with other genres, but we're open still to discovery and the discovery and curation of exceptional Irish and international literature. We do believe, and that's why we're delighted to be here at Allingham, kinship and the associations we've developed over lifetimes in publishing and literary endeavour is very important to us. We're a circle of like-minded souls. We've a shared desire to create books that look well and are beautiful. And these, you know, these Lepus Print titles, I think, speak for themselves in terms of that, the attention to all of that. And we want them to be nice objects. The printed book, I think, still has a very fond place in people's hearts. We're based in the border region, as you rightly said. Sligo maybe not included until Remixarry got it as a border county, but it is in the border region and has some of that kind of frisson to it. And Lepus Print intends to cultivate Ireland's what we call our fifth province. And this is a concept that was used in the field day anthology and others, and it comes almost from a philosopher, Richard Carney. He talked about the fifth province as not only incorporates the notion of Ireland as comprised of 4 provinces and a middle or centre province, but the fifth province is also a bond that stretches beyond borders and collectively unites the Irish community across the world. So really, distilled and put simply, the fifth province is it's a disposition where imagination and cultural growth evolves with each of us. And that, I think, is very much what we are after here in Richard Carney's concept of the fifth province. We are trying to thoughtfully connect writers and readers in creative ways and nourish and enrich cultural life. And that would be a very important of what we're doing. We'll always be shaped and refined by our community of writers and our readers, hugely important, fellow residents of the fifth province. And we do want you to join us on this journey. In helping you to join us on the journey, we had to take into consideration that we do not have the resources for kind of open submissions and, you know, for reading manuscripts that they come, and unsolicited manuscripts as they tend to be called in mainstream publishing. So how do you get to know, or how do you make contact with Lepus Print? Well, to that end, we set up what happened earlier today in the festival, in the Allingham Festival, with Patched Publication. It's essentially follows a workshop format where you submit material. We get to read it. And today it was myself and Mary Branley, because we were working mainly in fiction and non-fiction, but that's not necessarily who it might always be, depending on the kind of material that's coming in. There's poetry there and there was fiction. So in submit work to that process, we get to scope out who's out there, what's out there. And although it was a virtual event this morning, it would be hoped that it would become a real meeting, and that would be a chance for face-to-face, and we get to see what you're doing and also develop that sense of a community of writers. Obviously, like all publishers, we'll have a limited output, but even at 2 to 3 titles a year, which would be ambitious by any standard if you compare it with the likes of a new entity like Tramp Press and that, even if you compare it with that, that's still quite a demand for material. And while we have a vision for the next couple of books, and in particular our next project to commemorate the centenary of the birth of Leyland Bardwell with a collection or a selection of her poetry, I do think that there is scope for new material that we're on the lookout for all the time. And is there something fresh, original? Diversity, inclusivity, and finding the voices that may not be heard or overlooked in the mainstream publishing is very important to us. So peripherality, the border region as part of an identity, and as inclusive and vision for equality across the boards is what we're aiming for. Tall and ambitious targets, but I think we have a good team behind us, and I'm confident that, you know, in setting out a direction here with our first 2 titles and our next intended title, you know, we're fulfilling some of those goals. And I hope that's the case. I hope we can keep our community of writers with us, because we need you to sort of feed us the material, and we need you as our first readers and critics of what we're doing and the directions we're taking. So that is essentially Lepus Print. And Lepus Print has 2 authors, new with Lepus Print, but not new to print, and certainly not new to the art scene. And they're going to read for us this evening. And it's a great pleasure to be introduced both of them. We're going to start with Johnny Gogan. Johnny would be familiar to a lot of you as a filmmaker and documentary maker in particular. He's a very, very experienced presence in community arts, and indeed it's like with political leanings of community arts and that as well. He is a filmmaker, excuse me, He's a filmmaker, and his work includes The Last Bus Home, Mapmaker, Black Ice, which I was involved with happily myself, and The Adventures of Flannery is a documentary along with Hubert Butler, Witness to the Future, Prisoners of the Moon more recently, and very current Groundswell, which looked at the whole kind of fracking and the Love Leitrim movement and all of that. Very strongly connected and a strong identity with the border area. And of course, Johnny was instrumental in setting up the adaptations, which brought film and literature together and looked at Irish writers whose work had been adapted for film and showcased that and had events all around that. So he's long been dedicated to the exploration of the relationship of screen drama and literature. And there's a strong, I think, kind of dramatic impulse and a literary impulse in his new work, which is Station to Station. And also, actually, what I like about it is that though we talk about peripherality, it is mostly set in Spain, but gets a dramatic tension from its connection with Ireland and cross-border region. But I'm going to hand over to Johnny now, our first reader this evening. And when Johnny's done, I'll introduce Mary. So Johnny, you're very welcome, and I'll let you speak for yourself now.
Great, thanks for Brian. That was a great introduction to Lepus. It's such a fantastic initiative, and it's great to take the power back, which is, I think, of what a lot of us are about, you know, making the center where you actually decide you're going to pitch your tent in the world. And yeah, so it's been exciting. And I had one previous, I did a novel before 10 years ago called Ghost Writers. And it's set in Dublin in the late 80s. But working with Brian on the production side of this was a real education in terms of actually getting the whole kind of presentation right, and really working the novel and the potential in the novel. And Brian has a great editorial eye as well, which is really invaluable. So Station to Station is largely set in 2008. I wanted to many of us have had different experiences about the financial crash in 2008. It was one of the big events, certainly for my generation, and it had a big effect on everyone. And I wanted to try and capture that in a dramatic form. And I would say that had been done very well in factual writing by, say, the likes of Fintan O'Toole. So in approaching it from a fictional point of view, I wanted to take perhaps a more oblique way, a more oblique approach. And so I had been working in Spain quite a lot in these years, and so I had researched a lot and knew the landscape well, knew the terrain, had a certain knowledge of the language. So the story is about a diplomat, Jack Lennon, who is getting his first and potentially his last posting as a diplomat, when he's a very lowly third secretary. But he finds himself very soon after arriving in Spain being detailed to shadow a minister, government minister, who goes missing, goes AWOL on the south coast. And he enlists the support of a press officer from the Junta de Andalucía, the government in Andalucía, and they become kind of partners in crime and tracking down the minister and working out exactly what he's been up to. But it's really, the book is trying to capture the atmosphere just before the crash. So in this section I'm about to read, they're on some, Jack and Teresa are on some downtime in Malaga, and they're seeing the sights. So I'm just going to read two pieces, and one will then deal with Ireland after that, but I can explain that when we get to it. So here we go. Malaga. She stepped over to the window to take in the view while he remained seated on the bed. He gazed at her, and she seemed more comfortable now. Evening, with its sounds of receding traffic and gentle voices from the esplanade below, drifted through the open window. The silence between them lasted some time. He decided not to fill it and went to join her instead, embracing her from behind. He sensed her slightly climb up to his touch. Bien? She didn't answer directly, and perhaps, inspired by the strollers below, suggested un paseo. A walk put paid to all thoughts of coupling. As if in an attempt to explain, she said, "It's a long time since I have been for Malaga." Perhaps that was it. She was lost in thoughts of a past visit, most likely with Jose Luis. He felt a tightening in the stomach but held his counsel. He wondered to himself if she regretted coming and if perhaps things were happening too fast. A walk, great. Decked in their sunglasses and casual air, he considered what a good-looking pair they made as they strolled the Parque del Paseo close to the port. Young immigrant men from Morocco and further south in Mali and Burkina Faso took the shade under the watchful gaze of a couple of officers of the Guardia Civil. Here, worlds collided. Not so much a conflict of civilizations, but a conflict of expectations. These young guys wanted to work. Spain needed workers to maintain its boom, but didn't want to let them know they needed them. If they weren't picked up by the Guardia Civil, they would find their way into the invernaderos of El Ejido or the vineyards of the likes of Don Velasco O'Reilly. Then they would have their foothold in Europe. After a while, Teresa led them across the Avenida Cervantes into the museum quarter. The Picasso Museum was just closing, so they passed on under the shadow of the Alcazaba and its Roman amphitheater. Her mood appeared to lift as they got lost in the back streets. She seemed to be looking for a particular place, and for a moment he felt as if she had forgotten about him, or was subconsciously trying to lose him with her quickened pace. He was tempted to let her away to see if she noticed that he was tempted to let her away to see if she noticed that he was no longer in step, but decided instead to stay the pace. Perhaps she just needed to walk off some anxiety. Not far from the Alcazaba, they entered a small and modern plaza. Perhaps it was this place she had been looking for, some past haunt. A plaque revealed it as the Plaza Juderia, the site, as so the plaque explained, of Malaga's once lively Jewish quarter. Jack knew about Andalusia's Islamic, but not its Jewish past. Teresa sensed his curiosity. "I've never been here before. It's new in this form, no? Nobody really know about this culture." It was certainly news to Jack. "Yo tampoco, Teresa." "Bueno, I thought you might have interest." She had brought him here for his benefit. It must have been something about that first conversation on the train about the Iraq War that had stimulated this. He looked to her for some explanation. "You know, the Corban Caliphate was very tolerante, but it changed when," she was searching for the words before reverting to Spanish, "se cayó el reino de Granada," when the kingdom of Granada fell. "Sí, a los reyes católicos." She explained that Columbus would have departed from Cadiz to the New World instead of Palos de la Frontera in 1492 if Cadiz hadn't been taken up with the mass deportation of the Jewish population of Andalusia. This newly restored plaza was now home to a statue of an 11th century Jewish philosopher and poet, Solomon ibn Gabirol. She explained further that Ibn Gabirol had been murdered by a Muslim poet, jealous of his talents, and was buried in secret under a fig tree, which, after some time, bore very sweet fruit. People got curious about the wonderful fruit. The tree was dug up, the body discovered, and the murderer exposed. Jack was amused. "That's pause for you." She took a moment to understand the droll Dublin tone in which he delivered this comment. "Claro, you understand." She smiled, but was clearly struggling with whatever was bothering her. "I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but Spain was better when the cultures lived together." He was sure she was probably right, but was concerned about how earnest she had become. With that story, she took off again, and after some 10 minutes, they came to an alleyway of restaurants and bars. "Tienes hambre, Jack?" It wasn't so long since he had feasted with Toland and the ambassador. He was more preoccupied by her mood. Puede ser, but first tell me what's on your mind. She looked at him intensely. She seemed distressed. He thought she was about to end it. "I can't do this, Jack." So maybe I can leave it there with that section, or I can read a second section. It's a shorter section, so maybe I'll just jump forward because it being the Allingham Festival. Tom, do we have time for another section?
Go ahead and read another section there, please.
Okay, Cool. So yeah, just being the Allingham Festival, the story actually starts in St. Patrick's Purgatory, Lough Derg, and it's in the main narrative is in Spain, but there are small vignettes, if you like, that happen on the Purgatory, because Jack, many years after the events of that in Spain, goes on the pilgrimage to Station Island, as was the term that is also known as, and that Seamus Heaney wrote that collection called Station Island. So he's going there for a purpose other than a religious reason. He's looking for someone, and he's given a pseudonym to the prior when he's been booking his place. But I thought it'd be good to read the section because we're so close to Ballyshannon where this happens. His fellow pilgrims were now availing of the water and rough oat cakes with which the monks were allowing them break their fast. The memory of that night in Malaga and how close they had been brought a smile to his face as he endeavored to extricate the pieces of oat from the cavities that had opened in his teeth in the intervening years. How wonderful to behold your joyous disposition. The prior had come to sit beside him. Jack decided to spare him the true source of his joy and nodded politely before introducing himself under the pseudonym with which he had registered on the sanctuary website. Ah, Justin, we spoke on the telephone. You're doing some research on Viscount de Pereos. Yes, I understand he wrote the book that put the place on the map, so to speak. The Rough Guide to St. Patrick's Sanctuary, Justin. The prior chuckled at his modern allusion to the 14th century Catalan text. Jack forced a smile. How rough an experience was it? One has to surmise that he was not in the best frame of mind when he arrived here. The strain of the journey, his time with the native Irish in the court of O'Neill. They lived a frugal existence, a mere diet of meat and milk, and most disappointingly for Piraeus. The prior dropped his voice. No wine. Yes, the Spanish like their wine. In fact, we have a small party of Spanish with us on the island at the moment. I believe one of their number has a connection to viticulture. Perhaps you would like to meet. Jack was excited by this news, relieved to know his visit was not wasted, but declined the offer a bit too violently with his raised hand. The time and the place of this meeting would be of his choosing. Thankfully, the prior didn't insist, but returned to their shared interest in Ramon de Pereos. Piraeus may have been somewhat scandalized as the women had no care for modesty, as cloth was a rare commodity. He noted a similarity with the lifestyle with the Bedouins of Barbary of his native Spain, who also lived a nomadic life. After his overreaction, Jack decided to humor the prior further. I wonder if that was the real intention, an intelligence mission. Very few outsiders had knowledge of Gaelic Ireland, no? No, I believe it was a spiritual quest. He was seeking out the soul of his erstwhile friend and master, the King of Aragon. The prior, my predecessor, so to speak, pleaded with him not to enter the cave, but Piraeus was a man of faith, a man on a mission, a man to run towards a fire. Indeed, Jack had read Piraeus' account of his journey into hell by means of the pit on the island St. Patrick had declared as the gates of hell. But he surmised that Piraeus had leaned a little too heavily on Dante's Inferno, published earlier that century, a tome he probably had with him in his holiday reading. The prior was on a roll. I believe the Druids who dwelled here long before the arrival of St. Patrick applied a similar significance, and the notion of an underworld predates all of the aforementioned. In any case, the cave was filled in long ago, and how should I put it? And we don't go there anymore. Jack was momentarily perplexed by this modern allusion to something so ancient. Hell? The prior nodded. Indeed. Hell is no longer part of the afterlife. No? The prior became reflective. It is simply part of life, Justin. You strike me as a man of the world. I'm sure you've had your trials and losses. The comment caught Jack off guard. Trials indeed, but he was not seeking to address them through reflection. He was here to get even. The prior could sense the pilgrim's discomfort, but didn't press and left Jack to contemplate the true purpose of his visit. His fellow pilgrims were stirring under the solicitations of the prior. Jack still had a further 3 stations to endure. So that's it. Thanks very much. That's Station Island. And Station to Station is the name of the novel. and available in plenty of bookshops in South Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim, and further afield. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Johnny.
Brian, back to you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. That was lovely. That's the one thing, it's like hymns to the silence when we're reading on Zoom, the applause and that warmth and that response. We'll give you a little hand there, Johnny, and thank you. That's lovely. I particularly like the resonances this novel sets up. And I hope that when also things open up a little more, we will see actually this on airport stands and catching that kind of read as well. Because I would tell people that though we have a very strong literary pedigree in Lepus Print, you know, we still write stories that are meant to engage and entertain and never be sidetracked from our fundamental cause. Thanks, Johnny. Now, our next Lepus author is Mary Branley. Mary will be known to many of you. Mary is a poet. She's a writer, musician. She's based in North Sligo here. She's the author of 2 collections of poetry, Martin Let Me Go and A Foot on the Tide. And her poetry has been included in very prestigious anthologies such as the Windharp, Poems of Ireland since 1916, the Field Day Anthology of Irish Writing, and the Watchful Heart, a new generation of Irish poets, poems and essays. She's been translated into Catalan, which is a nice cross current there with you, Johnny, and Spanish. She's was awarded the Patrick and Katherine Kavanagh Fellowship in 2008. And she's the recipient of numerous residencies and bursaries from the Arts Council of Ireland. And indeed, I should acknowledge the support of the Arts Council of Ireland for Lepus Print, indirectly as such, but huge assistance in terms of funding editorial input for Mary and also for presenting her work where it will be and will be available. She will be touring that, where it will be presented combined with musical interpretations and responses to her work. So Mary's musicality is there in her work and in her poetry all the time, I think, without doubt. We're gratified that Mary's work would hold the attention of Elaine Quillinan, the Irish professor of poetry, our poet laureate, who said of Mary's work that I was delighted to find these lively, direct, faithful poems. They're full of colour and adventure, coming out of a tradition of language, music and dance to express the passions of the world we live in. And it is the world we live in that very much occupies Mary. She is open to the transcendental, to the ephemeral, to that other kind of dimension of reality that, Seamus Heaney referred to in when his monk shimmies down a rope to our world and can barely breathe here and goes back to his world, just as we couldn't sustain the entire transcendental existence, but must live in the real world as well. I love that cross current between the two. There's a lyricism, there's an honesty, there's an attentiveness to the real world in Mary's work. These are wide ranging without ever losing sight what another endorsement would say as the most central of precincts, the human heart. So it's my great pleasure to be handing over to Mary Branley to read for us now. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks very much, Brian and Johnny. That was a lovely reading by you, and I'm so glad to be having a reading with the Allingham. That's such a delight. I'm here in Maharao, the Plain of Eve. We're here at the very beginning of winter, and I'm going to take a deep dive, you might say, into the dark, into journeying into the past, into the deep past maybe. And but firstly, I'd like to say hello to, I know family and friends are tuning in from Galway and Limerick. My family in Edinburgh and Glasgow are also tuning in, so thank you so much for that. My friends are tuning in from Lewis, and thank you so much for being here. So in terms of where does the deep past begin, well, we really can't get past the Bible and the Plain of Eve, Adam and Eve in the very beginning. There's a certain mythography and mythology surrounding this area, Maharal. I mean, the translation from the Irish says it's the Plain of Eve. And so this is where we are. Maybe it's a sort of even a link back to a further, you know, the High Brazil, Atlantis, who knows? And as a poet, we don't have to be scientists and we don't have to be historians. We can just dive into symbols and fragments as they are presented to us, like Maharal being the Plain of Eve. So I'm going to start here with the Plain of Eve. They say Maharal means the Plain of Eve, Ballinfull, the town of blood, Ballinfull, battles, cattle, floods. They say the ark shipwrecked on Bangobon discouraged its seasick passengers and crew. They say if we only knew the language written in the sky, we could read the prayers by the barnacle geese as they fly to Inishmurray. So whether that's going back to 6,000 years ago when God made the world or whatever, or something pointing much further back, I'm going to point next to St. Columba and Inishmurray and his connections there, St. Columkill. And would you believe, and everybody, you know, you're always looking for a date to link in with people, and this is the St. Columba, St. Columkill, 1500. So wasn't he born in Donegal in 522, they say in Garton, Donegal. I mean, how they know that, God knows, it's anyone's guess. So my next poem is St. Columba. And again, you know, this is an old poem. I wrote this maybe 30 years ago. Again, knowing a little bit about St. Columba or St. Columkill. And again, I had the opportunity to visit from Inishmurray to Iona in Scotland, off the coast of Scotland, where St. Columkill ended up, St. Columba. Not a bad spot at all. Where they didn't seem to know why, in fact, he had landed there. But I'll talk about that in a minute. This is Song of Columba. And again, Columba, you see, is the Latin for Columkill. It means the dove of peace. I am Columba, prince of guilt, surveying the death of Finian's troops in the lengthening shadow of Ben Gulbon, bodies strewn like the sheaves of a dismembered book litter this field. My victory is not sweet. I will go to Inishmurray where Malash will hear my tale, forgive my sins. I will take power from the cursing stones to smite my foes. Generations will pronounce my name, St. Columba, man of letters, man of God. I walked the waves from Strida to the blessed rock, glistening on the horizon, a huge sea beetle foaming at the mouth. Cormorants announced my feet, crying their sorrow in an angry sky. Eider ducks dipped out of sight into the belly of a rolling wave. A council of shags stood on the rocks, whispering, Prince of Guilt. The monks were at their evening prayer, singing glory. Once ashore, I slept and dreamed a voyage on a bitter sea, north to the cold, chastising wind, a barren place, and there to stay. I am Columba, Prince of Guilt, walking the edge of cold Iona, ancient with the weight of memory, turning with the days grey. And of course, that poem is referencing the Battle of the Books, where Columkill had stolen Finian's manuscript and copied it out without telling him. And the High King Diarmaid had said, you're in big trouble, give that book back. And he said he wouldn't. And Finian came down, so they met in Cool-Drummond for the Battle of the Books. That was 20 years later. And he was banished to Iona. Now, when my partner and I, Bob, went to Iona, you know, we hopped in over the wall, not knowing we had to go through the stile and pay money, but we just thought, why would you do that when we could wander around Inishmurray? But anyway, there was the tour guide was saying, well, we don't really know why St. Columkill came to Iona. And I couldn't believe this. I had to put my hand up and say, well, I know why. There's a little bit of murder, forgery, fraud, and a little bit of in between. And then she politely said, well, apart from that. So yeah, apart from forgery, fraud, and murder, you know, we don't know why he came to Iona. But anyway, returning to Inishmurray, Inishmurray is the place where the barnacle geese arrive on their first landing to Inishmurray. And who knows how many thousands of years the barnacle geese have been doing this. So another journey, our friends, the barnacle geese, come in their thousands from Greenland, and they get us through the winter, certainly in this part of the world. So the next poem I'm going to read, again, it's an old one, and it's not in the foot on, it's not in the pinch of snow. It's in the foot on the tide, which Brian was said to me, listen, don't confine your reading to the pinch of snow. Branch out in all directions, whatever suits you. So here's another journey to Lissadell, and again, this is my territory here. This is very much my neighbourhood, Lissadell, Maharow. I'll be going to Glencar shortly, but in the moment we're here at Lissadell. And this is an old poem. The barnacle geese in season from October on leave Greenland on a southern curve. They navigate the skies and stay all winter at Lissadell in sanctuary. They used to say the geese began as fish, birthed by the barnacle, then turned fowl. I have no season here, no privileged duality, and lack a myth that might protect me, hunkered down in the smell of the sea at low tide, slipping fingers under moist and matted wrack, picking mussels of a soft furred rock. Their lips are sealed. Constance raced her chestnut mare across the strand. Eva picked mussels here with Esther. Hand in salty hand, we watched the sunset coaxing light into another time. The house is falling slowly down, or at least it was in 1988. The name will die. Perhaps some shrewd immigrant with dollars from New York will snap it up and start a health spa. The local maids will trudge along the corridors, glad of the work, saved from the ship. It's summer now, and the geese have gone. So that was a poem I wrote in 1989. And of course, the house did pass from the Gore Booth name into the Cassidy Walshes. Countess Margaret, of course, this huge, towering presence, and her sister Eva Gore Booth, huge presence in our history. And the story in our family has it that when Countess Markowitz arrived in Grange in 1919, after being elected, the first woman elected, to Westminster, they were absolutely hitting the ground running and setting up various local sections of the IRB or the IRA. And my grandfather, Patrick Brandley, was one of the first men to line up. And I'll come to that in a minute. I'm going to actually now go to the new book, A Pinch of Snow in a Black Velvet Glove, which is the title poem for this third collection. And again, it's a journey. It was a journey that we took in winter, the miner's path at the back of Glencar, all the way up the mountain to the Barytas mine. And Barytas is this very hard white substance, like a lot of mining in the surrounding areas has got to do with coal, but this is the very opposite here. This was a white substance, Barytas, that actually had no value whatsoever, except used in a sort of a scam. That's my dog pitter-pattering across the floor. It was used in a scam to weigh paint, because paint used to be sold by its weight, not by the volume. So it's a strange history with Barytas. It's now used in drill heads to cool the drill heads in this sort of friction or fracking or, mining for oil. A Pinch of Snow and a Black Velvet Glove, again, it's a journey back through time past our grandparents' home in Thermord Lane Car, and so on and so forth. It's a couple of parts. The miner's path stretched back into the past for us and up Ben Bulben that January morning. The day was black and white and every shade of grey, like a photo from the 30s, with grim-jawed, black-shawled, long-skirted women and children in bare feet. We came to our grandparents' home, Thermore, Glencar, still roofed, but hearthless, grooved in the valley and blind to the lake, the slopes, the bay. We remembered the story of their wedding day. The church was ringed with soldiers on the run. The best man couldn't join them at the altar, so a modest labourer stood in, long socks to the knee. The married couple jaunted home to the table spread with sweet cake and stout, a spray of late roses from the wild briar backed by fern. The bride was shown how to hold a black revolver in her white wedding glove, how to steady her eye, her hand, and brace against her husband. She practiced on a plank of wood all day. 3. To the left, the telegraph poles gasped upward. We bowed like the rusted pylons on the right, keeping on for cleft in rock and stopping often. We traced the miner's path to the barred Baritis shaft. Emerging in the hard white mist, the outline of the hostel, room enough for 18 men. From the litany of shadows, our fathers and our uncles stepped out of the mouth of the mine, loose-limbed, beardless men in 50s caps, their youth and hunger bitter from the damp. Each was eager for a rationed puff, a spume of smoke as someone coughed and spat. Its red eye, pinched by thumb and finger, stashed in a waistcoat pocket. Seams of sleet and hailstones, darkness closed on wheels and cogs, on trespassers and innocence, on poverty. My cousin played the foggy Jew on her silver whistle. All I could do was take a pinch of snow in a black velvet glove and feel the bone cold misery. A raven free in a rain cloud passed over us, said nothing. And because I have mentioned my grandparents' wedding and the labourer standing in, the best man was on the run, so a labourer just stood in by proxy. I'm going to just go on another journey now, which is a poem I wrote for my dear friends. I was asked to write a poem for their civil partnership. And of course, that was a great honour, and it's a great use of poets to say, would you just, write some words for our ongoing journey as a committed couple. So this was for Pat and Jane under civil partnership. Another journey. Today is a gift to us all. By your expression of love, by your commitment to one another, we receive. By your expanding love for one another, we too are embraced. As the house of your love turns into a mansion, not only are you sheltered and cherished, we are too. As you take the road together, we follow your beautiful lead. May you know the exact words of comfort for the other, the healing hand in illness, a light embrace that dissolves all sorrow and all fear. May you see with perfect clarity the best in one another. It's an easy task for us to bless you and wish you well, for you are already graced with the gift of one another. And a journey of another sort. I wrote this for my father, and he died in June. And I wasn't sure what might come of this, but as I began to think about the Glencar landscape where he grew up, something about a trip that I took with my sister and her family coming back down the low road at Glencar Lake, and she was pointing out there's sorrel and there's yarrow, and something about the sorrel and the yarrow combined in my mind as a kind of bell word. Those words were like bells ringing out in a certain way some of our sorrow. And it was later on I began to look at, well, what is it, you know, do these plants, these wild plants that are growing in the ditch, have they medicinal properties? And it all unfolded from that. And this is called viatica, a Latin word meaning the things you need for the journey. And this poem is imagining me as a herbalist, metaphorically making some kind of remedies for my father to take with them as he journeys on from this life, going further and further through the dimensions. So viatica. Everything you need for the journey can be found in the ditch apothecary. Tea for the grief, hawthorn leaf, wild rose petals and motherwort, poultice for an open wound of sorrow, anoint yarrow for sudden pain or spasm. We've been busy since your death with harvest, steep and simmer, pestle and mortar, preparing tinctures, and it's not too late to place them on your lips, nor heal the dead. Now I'm going to, just read a couple of very shorties now, two for Leyland, and then get us home, come back from the dark. But anyway, here we are with Leyland, a Benediction, and Leyland Bardwell, my great friend and mentor. She was to Brian as well, somebody that we visited often, and she visited us often, and we were back and forth in one another's lives for many a year. And this poem is, there's two short poems for Leyland here. The first one is called Benediction, and it's about Leyland's wishes for her funeral, really. She was 40 years older than me, and I'm no spring chicken. So by the time, we were discussing the matters of death and wakes and how all this might transpire, Leyland was well in the end of her 80s, if not the early 90s. And she had us tortured in many ways by saying she wanted to be buried at sea. We thought, it's not possible, Leyland. How are we going to manage that? We don't have a boat for the start. And even if we could get a trawler together, and we'd have you wrapped in torps and the concrete blocks fastened around you, and we tip you overboard. And not just at that moment, the old rescue helicopter would be flying overhead, or the trawler or the Coast Guard would arrive, and we'd be in fierce trouble. Because I don't think you can do that without a special permissions. Anyway, Benediction for Leyland. If you find me dead, gather up the Ruth Rendels and Inspector Morse. Promise me you'll scatter the Russians round the bed. Chekhov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. Her wishes, finally, were simple. Wake in the study, party in Ellen's, body to the College of Surgeons, then crematorium. Ashes to be scattered on the Liffey at Leixlip, facing the Dublin side. And this poem is called Final Quarter, where Leyland actually did spend, kind of the last quarter of her life. She came there at age 70. This tiny little cottage perched on the cliffs at Cluna, where really the sound of the sea would roar around you, especially on these wonderful, the night of the new moon, where you have a really high tide coming in and a powerful sea, and then the sound of the tide through the stones would It was a backdrop, orchestra. Final quarter. The house, a nocturne in B flat minor, whispering flies in F, a rattle of mice barely audible within the cymbalist crash of an oncoming sea, sharp rain on the single panes of glass, a short blast northwest through the front half-open door, her heart. And I'm going to finish with this, the end of our journeys, the dives into the dark, and it's called Night Prayer. Just before dawn, put me back in the same room I went to sleep in, or someplace else I recognize. After all that traveling in the dark, spinning with thirsty dreams, let me not have forgotten to buy milk and tea. Please leave something of the journey, a thread, a fragment of the other world. Put me back gently so the cracks don't jar as the birds awaken. Thank you so much for your listening attention, because I can feel it coming across online. Thanks, Tom.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. And thanks to Johnny and Brian. Listen, if this is the standard of work that Lepus Print is going to produce, I can guarantee that you're going to be a success. So, any concluding remarks, Brian?
Well, I would take your compliment on board and thank you very much. It means a lot to us. There's always a nervousness when you're putting your fledglings out in the world. On your chat line, I see Bob McPherson. It's her cover art here. We're talking about that community. We have a great poetry editor in Libby Hart. We also got tremendous help from Entercoil Green. And when Mary was reading A Pinch of Snow, there came a little line up there, A Litany of Shadows. And you're vying, is that a title? What's, where, you know, all these creative decisions. A pinch of snow and a black velvet glove is it, but there's always a moment where you're looking at your options. And I think it's that conversation with the books. Likewise with Johnny, I think that, you know, we've had this conversation over and back about being peripherality, but a universality, and being, you know, taking on Spanish culture and what happened here in this country and taking on what's happening on our own doorstep. So we'll continue that tradition, and we'll continue these hookups with yourselves in the Allingham and the festivals. It's great to be here, and thanks for hosting us.
Well, thank you,
Thanks.
Brian. I would like to conclude by just taking a 2-minute tour of the upcoming events at the Allingham Festival. Very quickly, tonight's the official launch of our festival, where Tommy Gorman is going to speak on Our Changing Ireland, Do Hope and History Rhyme? Tomorrow, we'll learn who won the 2021 poetry and flash fiction competitions, and that event, like this one, will be online. And there will be a launch of an art exhibit by Katherine McGaugh, and there'll be a concert tomorrow night by the Whileaways. Saturday, there's going to be a terrific reading by the contributors to the Lochshore Lines anthology, where the River Erne is the theme of the collection. That's at 1:30 in the afternoon. And in point under that, there were the Voices from Direct Provision reading has been canceled because one of the key readers had to go to the hospital. So hopefully we'll catch them next year. Frank Shovlin's going to speak about his new recently published Collected Letters of John McGahern, which he edited. We'll get to hear Stephen Ray, the actor, in conversation with Sean Rocks. And then we'll have some belly laughs with Seamus O'Rourke doing his brand new show, The Handyman. Finally, on Sunday, there'll be recitations and music and crack at the Gather Again open mic event. With this year, it'll take place in the Abbey. There will be a history hedge school with Tommy Graham in the afternoon, and a choral concert in the evening at St. Anne's. The tickets are still available for most of those events, and you can reserve them at allinghamfestival.com. So Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks again to Lepus Print, Brian, Mary, Johnny, and to all of us, good night.
Thanks, Sean.